Well, welcome. Welcome if you're here in person or watching online. It's really good to have you with us for our third week. We'll have 1 week to go. Don't forget we've got next week off because Sam and I are away, and then we'll be back the following week and we'll dive into Lamentations chapter 5. But today it's chapter 4. Today I want to divert a little bit from the book. We will have a look at its major observation about chapter 4 a little bit at the end. But I want to dive into something which was really prompted by the conversation that we had last week, and think about something called theodicy, which is the defence of God's goodness in view of the existence of evil, which is where we were venturing last week when we were thinking about chapter 3. And to do that, we're going to look at a book which I have never managed to finish with 3 attempts. Here it is. Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Anyone ever read it?
No.
I found it fascinating. What I cannot get beyond is that the Russian names are all quite similar, and then they have pet names which he switches to, and I've got a postcard here with everyone's name on it up to about page 100 at my third attempt. I've also had a go at listening to it on whatever it was, Audible or whatever, and I don't get on very well with listening to books, so I am determined to get through this, particularly as the book I've just recommended to Ruth dives into it quite a lot. That's prompted me to have a look at what I knew was there already. So to think about theodicy, we're going to be thinking about some quotes from Brothers Karamazov, as well as a book which you might be familiar with, which is a pretty dark book by Elie Wiesel, called Night. Anyone familiar with that?
No.
Okay. He is a Jew who was in a Second World War prisoner of war camp. After Corrie ten Boom's book, there's, I think, and what was the other one? That was about experiences in, it's the second most published book.
Levi.
Yeah.
Not now awareness.
Yeah. Of people that have had that experience. Yeah. And we'll talk about a scene in which happens, which is true, where he basically loses his faith. So, let's begin with the invocation. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord.
And the Lord hear my cry.
Let your ears be attentive
To my cry for mercy.
We have come as the people of God.
To voice our pain and assert our hope.
We have come as the people of God.
Where else can we go? You have the words of eternal life.
So, theodicy, the defence of God's goodness and omnipotence in the view of the existence of evil. And in this book by Brian Zand, he says, the most emotive and persuasive argument against the Judeo-Christian faith is not an argument against the existence of God, but an argument against the goodness of God. Yeah. So, Brothers Karamazov, the hero, Alyosha, has decided that he wants to join a religious order, and he's set his heart on becoming a monk. And he's being supervised by a guy called Ivan Karamazov, and he is completely disillusioned with God, and he's determined to undermine Alyosha's faith. And so he tells him 3 stories of atrocities committed against children to do so. You can see where he is going. And I'm not going to go into the depravity involved in those 3 stories, but needless to say, Dostoevsky didn't invent them. These are 3 stories which he has lifted from newspapers of his day and what was going on there. So the middle story is about a young girl that had been abused, and Karamazov says to Alyosha, "Can you understand that a small creature who cannot even understand what is being done to her by her parents in a vile place, in the dark and cold, beats herself on her strained little chest with her tiny fist and weeps with her anguished, gentle, meek tears for dear God to protect her? Can you understand such nonsense, my friend and my brother, my godly and humble novice? Can you understand why this nonsense is needed and created?" And in many senses, as I understand it, the rest of the book is Dostoevsky's defence of the notion of theodicy, that actually it is possible to defend God's goodness and omnipotence in the face of evil. I've not got to the end, so I don't know if he's successful. And if you want to have a go at it, well, good luck. But it's remarkable, and so many people talk about this book as being one of the absolute classics of spirituality. It's well over 1,000 pages long, and I'm determined to get there with it, but it'll need a fourth attempt and probably a sabbatical or something like that to give it a go. So, on to Lamentations 4. We're going to keep that idea in mind, whether it's possible to defend the goodness and omnipotence of God as we read this chapter. So chapter 4 begins, how the gold has grown dim, how the pure gold is changed. The sacred stones lie scattered at the head of every street. What's happened here?
Jerusalem's been destroyed.
Yeah. Jerusalem's being destroyed. But what's happened to those that have put their faith in gold under the bed, rubies, whatever?
They've either lost it or they've been sent into exile or they're dead.
Or it can't buy them anything. Actually, it's, if they have got it hidden away, what can they do with it? There is nothing to be done with it. It cannot buy their escape. It cannot buy them food. It has lost its. It has lost its. It's completely lost its value. And one of the things that chapter 4 throws up really is a reliance on false idols, and we can make idols out of anything. We don't have to have an Asherah pole tucked away in our garage for us to have an idol. An idol is anything that takes the place of God. The second commandment is, do not make for yourself a graven image. Yeah. Images of God in the Old Testament are completely vanished. Completely vanished. So that's the first idol. There are other idols as well. There's the idolatry of actually putting your faith in people. So look at verse 7. Her princes were purer than snow, whiter than milk. Their bodies were more ruddy than coral, their hair like sapphire. And now they are unrecognisable. Now their visage is blacker than soot. They are literally not recognised in the streets because, actually, this has been the big leveller, yeah? And so their skin is shrivelled on their bones and has become as dry as wood. And here in verse 10 is where the question of theodicy raises its head. And I thought about skirting over this verse, but we've talked about it a little bit before, and it is the worst of lamentations. The hands of compassionate women. Listen, it is not heartless women that have done this. It is compassionate women who have boiled their own children. They became their food in the destruction of my people. And it seems to me that encapsulated in those verses is something which is on a par with the abuse that Dostoevsky talks about and confronts the notion of theodicy within Brothers Karamazov. It's awful. Awful. It is Israel's lowest moment. And then the other thing that it challenges, this chapter, is the failure of leadership. And we talked about that before last week, the bankruptcy of the leadership. And we picked that up in verse 13. It was for the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests who shed the blood of the righteous in the midst of her. So again, the failure of prophet and priest is brought to light. But to the king. Just go down to verse 20. The Lord's anointed, the breath of our life. These are really honorific words being spoken, aren't they? Of the king, Zedekiah, who had led his people astray, but they still honour him because he is and they still see him as the Lord's anointed. Do you remember David's words about Saul? He was a pretty awful king. Far be it from me to go against the Lord's anointed. And you get echoes of that here. One of whom we said, under his shadow we shall live among the nations. And of course, what's going on here is that there is a mistrust, a misplaced trust, isn't there, in the leadership? Yeah, this is the king that has sought an alliance with Egypt for protection, and under his shadow we will live among the nations if we seek that relationship with Egypt, which was always going to be bankrupt. Verse 17 is the really interesting one. And this is where I wonder what's going on. Our eyes failed, ever watching vainly for help. We were watching eagerly for a nation that could not save, Egypt. And I wonder in this moment about the place of Peter. It's almost as if he is complicit as part of the king's court in their seeking the protection of Egypt. And this is why I don't believe that Jeremiah wrote this book. because Jeremiah is absolutely forthright in saying, don't be seeking the solace of Egypt. You know, God's judgment is coming and there is nothing that is going to change it. This doesn't ring true for Jeremiah, and that is why I think the book is written by someone else. And here what they're doing is they're acknowledging their complicity in what's happened. So do you remember last week we had that discussion about my observation that you get the leadership you deserve?
Mm-hmm.
And one or two people challenged me on that, and I think I stick by it still, although you made me think. I can't remember who it was.
It was me.
It was you, yes.
It was me.
Yeah, yeah. Because
I said, how can you say that Russia has got what it deserves, the leader it deserves? How can you possibly say that?
and I said,
And you said,
if enough people speak up,
yeah, if enough people voted for him.
yeah, stood up, because that's how change is happening in Poland.
Yeah.
You know, that is still a big part of my growing up. You know, Lech Walesa and all that happened there. Yeah, the fall of the wall
Oh yeah.
in Germany. Yeah,
It all took a long time to happen.
it did, didn't it? It was. Yes, it did.
I think the situation in Russia is a bit different.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah,
A bit more nuanced.
I think it's very hard to speak out in Russia.
Well, you can't, can you?
No, you can't. So if you're to challenge the leadership, you know.
It's just there's a tipping point, isn't it? That's certainly what happened in Albania, which was as a repressive a regime as you could imagine, with Hoxha. I mean, it was of a moment, wasn't it? Because it followed on the tails of what happened in Poland and East Germany, Albania. And at the time, I think we had big hopes for Russia because it was Gorbachev, and he'd had that. And then there was Yeltsin, who just seemed to bumble along, but was, yeah, but it was what followed, wasn't it? With Putin, and we didn't even know what we were doing. What the world did,
No,
what Russia
you
did.
could say that the nation should have stood up to Putin
Yeah, absolutely.
rather
perhaps.
than just the
Yeah.
individual people in the country. I think it's very hard for them to speak out.
Yeah.
For a start, they don't always know what's happening.
I think that there are surely people that do know. It depends where you choose to read, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it also, people do know things, but they don't always want to say to anybody else
Unspoken,
because
yeah.
they don't know if they're in with
Mm.
the government or... Because my family that lived in East Germany, they weren't supposed to watch Western TV, and people did, but I think my grandfather didn't want anybody in the house to listen to it because he was frightened about what would
The
happen.
consequences.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Angela.
And people didn't go to church because, except if they were very old ladies. A bit like No, they didn't go to church because you could go to church, but you might not get a job or a decent job, or you might not get the benefits of not, being part of the state. So I think it's from outside. You might say, why didn't people stand up to Hitler? Why didn't people stand up to Putin? But we don't know quite what that's like, do we?
No, we don't.
The number of people who turned up at that funeral, it was so brave.
I know, it was brave.
Incredibly
Yeah.
brave.
And he was
which
such an
funeral?
amazing
Navalny.
man.
Oh, yeah, Navalny, yeah.
Wasn't he? He was just such an amazing
Yes.
man to stand up
Yeah.
to that and to, to go back
And he
after
knew
that
that they
attempt
died,
on his
didn't
life.
he?
Yeah, he knew.
He knew they would get him.
And the 45 that they've arrested from the funeral
Yeah.
will see their fate, won't they?
Yeah.
We don't have to make that, we don't have to
At the moment,
risk our lives, our homes, our families in order to stand up to anybody in this country, do we really?
Mark says at the moment. Yeah.
There's a sense of complacency in some
At the
ways, isn't
moment,
there?
yeah.
yeah.
And that's where I think your thing that we get the leaders we deserve stands in, because when people, isn't there that saying that if you watch evil happen, that's as bad as not stopping it.
Yeah.
Doing nothing is what there is a phrase, isn't
There is,
there?
They came for,
Yeah.
Yeah, they came for the Jews. I was not a Jew, so I did not
Yeah.
speak. They came for the
the gypsies, the Romanies.
Yeah, and I wasn't one, so I did not speak. And in the end, they came for me, and there was no one to speak for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't know where that was from.
I can't remember. I've got it.
So there is a little bit of hope at the end of chapter 4. Well, for Zion at least, which is interesting. The punishment of your iniquity, O daughter Zion, is accomplished. He will keep you in exile no longer. And it's of course Jeremiah who says that actually their exile will not be forever, it will be for 70 years. But then there is a bit of, if you're an Edomite, you've had it. Yes, what goes around is coming around for Edom. And the reason for that, I think, certainly in the eyes of the writer, is that they're close relatives, really, and yet they've stood in their way in the past, and now they are gloating. Yeah, they've joined in, and they are gloating at Jerusalem's fall, and so the judgment is, your turn will come. And so this is where the questions of theodicy arise. And one of the issues going on, I think, is almost what's called the progressive revelation of God in the Old Testament. How we get to understand them a little bit more, and how actually much of what we read, of course, is being made sense of in the light of not just the Exodus story, but the story of their exile in Babylon. Because actually, for the writers, the compilers of the Old Testament, as we have it, this is where it all starts to come together and make sense, their story. Who is God? He's the one who rescued them from Egypt. Who is God? He's the one who will make these dead bones come to life. It's there that the Psalms as we have them get sorted into order and are edited. It's, Ezekiel is writing, Isaiah is writing, and they're making sense of their history in the Exodus, with their scriptures compiled then. They make sense of the story of Josiah that we looked at. King Josiah, the good king who finds the book of Deuteronomy at the back of the cupboard, and they dust it off. So back to Eli Wiesel. He's a prisoner of war as a Jew. He's in a concentration camp, not a prisoner of war. He's in a concentration camp. And the camp are forced to come outside to observe a hanging. And two men are hung, but between them a young boy is hung. And the two men die pretty quickly. But because the young lad is only a young lad, he is light. And he hangs there for half an hour and is still alive. And they are forced to walk past this quivering lad. And Wiesel says, behind me I heard the same man asking, where is God now? And I heard a voice within me answer him, where is he? Here he is. He is hanging there on the gallows. And that can have a double meaning. But for Wiesel in that moment, what he meant was that God is dead. That God is dead. It was the end of his faith in that moment, as he records it. So where is God in unspeakable human suffering? He is there hanging on the gallows. And of course this is the second way of reading it. God does not exempt himself from the experience, but fully shares it with Christ. The only theodicy I know is that God too has hung, suffered and died upon the gallows in solidarity with the sad angel of Buchenwald. And that is the young lad he's referring to there. God too has been gazed upon in death throes. Where is God? So I came across this painting. Where is God? And it goes back to that idea that I've had a talk with Julie about this. This is a sermon I have preached more than once, and it goes like this: that in that hour on the cross, the sky goes black. Why? Because God cannot bear to look upon his Son, who has become sin for us, because he is a holy God and cannot look upon sin. Kendrick's hymn, "The Father Turns His Face Away," is absolutely based on that theology. But now when I read Psalm 22, which we looked at last week, I do not believe that's true. Where is God? He is the Father. He is absolutely there. The psalmist says, Psalm 22, he does not turn his face away. That's what the psalm says. Not the Father turns his face away. The Father does not turn his face away. And so in this painting, what you see is the Father's head right above the cross. Where's the Holy Spirit? He's there too in the form of a dove above the cross. God is very present in this painting. So let's get back to it. So I'll point to where it is. The dove is there, and actually you can just see this bearded figure there. It's from and down here, it's just because they were the patron saints of the guild that commissioned this painting. You have got Tobias and the Archangel Raphael. It's called the Holy Trinity. So Botticelli has caught onto something, in my opinion, in that. Zand, in his book, in the chapter where he talks about Brothers Karamazov and Elie Wiesel, goes to a song which I haven't heard for years, by Bruce Cockburn, Dwellers in a Dark Stream. And he talks about the last verse. So I'm walking in this prison camp world. I long for a glimpse of the new world unfurled. The chrysalis cracking and moistened winds uncurl like in the vision John saw. Like in the vision John saw. And this is the vision John sees on the island of Patmos. Of a new heaven and a new earth. And all of creation redeemed. So, we are going to listen to So reflecting on that verse, so when I'm walking in this prison camp world, I long for a glimpse of the new life unfurled. The chrysalis is cracking and moistened wings uncurl like in the vision John saw. So Brian Zand writes, but as we await the arrival of the New Jerusalem in a prison camp world that languishes between fallen creation and new creation, we find comfort in the truth that God in Christ has entered into all human suffering with full solidarity. Where is God? He is not aloof and impassible. He is hanging on the gallows with all who suffer. The agony of unjust suffering, the kind described by Elie Wiesel, the kind endured by millions of sufferers, does not lie outside the actual human experience of God. Is this an adequate theodicy? Maybe. Maybe not. But it's the only one I know that approaches any measure of satisfaction. One of my definitely top 5 Christian books is The Jesus Way by Eugene Peterson, who translated The Message. It's a wonderful book. And it was there that I first encountered the story of Elie Wiesel. And as Zand says, it wasn't the end of the story for Wiesel. And so Peterson recounts going to listen to Elie Wiesel some 20-30 years after he'd written that book. And he said he basically took us through a Bible study, and everything that he said could have been transcribed from any church Bible study. The God who had died in Elie Wiesel's death camp experience had risen again. After hearing Wiesel speak with conviction about the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Peterson writes, a person can go through the worst, have every shred of faith pulled away from the soul, leaving it bare and shivering in a world where all the evidence gives proof that God is dead and still become a person of faith. God has been hung upon the gallows. God has drunk the bitter dregs of human depravity. God has died a degrading death at the hands of cruel oppressors. But God is not dead. One of my mates, Steve, was a Church Army captain in Farnborough, on the estate where Sam grew up. And he moved in there with the plan of starting a church, which went well. My brother was part of the planting start, and he just started in his house. The garages are just a bit 100 yards along the road from Sam, were whitewashed, and on them someone had written, painted in very large letters, God is dead. And Steve undertook to whitewash it out. Church Army, he wasn't having that. And sure enough, the words appeared again. And this happened about 4 or 5 times. And then Steve decided that he wasn't going to whitewash the whole thing out. So he just whitewashed out dead. And it left God is. And their estate. On that estate, as a witness, I believe, to the goodness of God that Steve was working for on that estate with that little group of faithful Christians. And there I will finish. Has anyone got any questions? Andrew, that's really hard. You were the one that sort of raised the question to theodicy. Has that helped?
Yeah, I don't really know. I'll have to read it all again, I think. I think the question that I had largely was that this business that about at the end of the lament last time, that sort of outpouring of hatred and that,
it's a very human response, but it's a human response rather than a godly one, I think.
Yeah, so it just seemed to me like that because it was in that song, that it was something that kind of would okay, whereas
so yeah, is it legitimising it?
Yeah.
We get all sorts of bits of poetry in the Bible. Which are human responses to situations people find themselves in. So, it depends on their view of Scripture, I suppose. And do I believe it's God inspired? Absolutely.
Do you believe so?
Do I believe it's God inspired? The whole of the canon? Yes, I think so. Absolutely. But how we treat it is a huge question, isn't it? Because I think what we see in the Old Testament and the New as well is human frailty and sinfulness in that story and God's interaction with us. and actually a developing understanding of who God is and the way that He works.
Because the two, the two are very different, aren't they? The God in the Old Testament and the God that you get through encounters with Jesus in the New Testament seem to me to be quite different. That's just out of ignorance.
There are some passages that you can't get around. And unfortunately, they are being used in the language of some of the... we can't get around what's going on in Gaza at the moment. And some of the language that is being used by people in government in Israel is the language of biblical annihilation. But I wonder, personally, and this is my personal view, how much of the whole Israel project since post-war, how much of it is a human construct. With the best of intentions, particularly after the Holocaust. But that displaced thousands and thousands of people. And not just people of Islamic faith, but whole Christian communities too. Just not of the Church of England sort.
It's like a shame. I'm becoming more and more aware of fear to say what I think. There is like that. You're terrified, you must say the margin, aren't you? So frightened, so already like you're still not speaking out. You just, you see what's going on in our politics at the minute, People are afraid to back one side or the other, so they're trying to shuffle between the two. And
what happens is
it will backfire
you get George
terribly.
Galloway.
Because exactly, look what that's going to do.
Absolutely.
That's going to be a vote
That's
switch
scary.
if ever there was. And we will get the government we deserve.
Yes.
By the back door.
Because we don't speak out.
And the return of Boris, who knows? Sorry.
Yeah,
That's not a prophetic word, by the way.
Boris programs on
And Putin claims to be a Christian,
I don't think that's
Well,
helpful, is it?
No, I think, well, what's going on there is, this is, where Lamentations is pointing out the failure of religious leadership. You can absolutely write what's going on with the Orthodox Church in Russia over that. Because they have been overtly seeking power. And the way they have done that is to pander to Putin and to legitimise his action, rather than prophetically speak up against him.
That's about organised religion, isn't it? And
Yeah.
the politics and religion,
Yeah.
rather than...
Yeah. Well, here we are, we're part of an organised religion, Church.
Yeah,
The
it
state
needs
church.
watching, doesn't it?
It does.
In any human-made hierarchy of structure, you need to watch out for it, don't you? I mean,
You do.
I've seen that you know, in another diocese, when I was the head of a church school, some of the things that, you know, diocesan ways of doing things and power struggles were just the antithesis, really, of what we're here for.
Well, that's it.